Won Junseo had not spoken to his wife in 42 days. He knew the number exactly. He had not counted on purpose. He simply remembered everything, cataloged everything, filed it away in the airless vault he called a mind. 42 days of separate wings, separate schedules, separate silences. Clean, professional, civilized. And then, through 3 inches of soundproofed mahogany and 10,000 square feet of architectural precision, he heard her laugh. Not a polite laugh. Not the careful, cultivated sound a woman makes at a dinner table when she knows she's being watched. This was the other kind, the kind that starts somewhere low and unguarded and spills out before the person even decides to let it go. Rich, unself-conscious, alive. And underneath it, rising to meet it, a man's voice, deep, unhurried, speaking in liquid French. The pen snapped. Won Jun looked down at the ruin of a $40 million merger document and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt replaced. The ink reached the signature line, ruined it completely. Won Jun set down the 2 halves of the pen with the precision of someone handling evidence, turned from the desk, and walked to the window. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Seoul below. 32 floors down, moving the way cities move at 11 in the morning. Purposeful, indifferent, utterly unconcerned with the fact that Won Junseo had just discovered that somewhere in his own house, in a wing he had not entered in 42 days, his wife was laughing like a woman with nothing to lose. He pressed 2 fingers to the cold glass. The French voice was still audible, faintly. A low, warm current running under the soundproofing like water finding the gaps in stone. Won Jun's jaw tightened. He was not jealous. He was cataloging. That was the word. He was a man who cataloged things. He noted anomalies, tracked variables, identified data points that didn't fit the expected model. The laugh was a data point. The French voice was a variable. The fact that his carefully constructed domestic arrangement had, apparently, an entire dimension he had not accounted for. That was the anomaly. He turned from the window and walked back to his desk with the controlled stride of a man who had somewhere to be, even though he had nowhere to be except inside the specific, suffocating realization that he had been wrong about something. He sat down, looked at the ruined document, looked at the door. Who is she talking to? Here is what Won Junseo had never been. Helpless. Inconvenienced, yes. Occasionally obstructed. But helpless. The word didn't have a slot in the mental architecture he'd spent 34 years constructing. He spoke 3 languages. He moved through the world with the frictionless efficiency of someone for whom logistics were simply a subspecialty of control. The Singapore Airlines gate agent was, apparently, an exception to every system he'd built. She was apologetic and immovable in equal measure, and her regional dialect, Teochew inflected, blurring the tones he knew into something he couldn't follow fast enough, was turning his functional Mandarin into a liability. She was explaining, with genuine regret, why his urgent rebooking to Seoul was essentially impossible. The next available seat was in 14 hours. His 6 a.m. board meeting was not a flexible variable. Won Jun was 2 minutes from pulling his phone to hand this off to his assistant. 40-minute delay minimum. Meeting in jeopardy. When the woman appeared. Not beside him. Through him. Almost. She had been 3 people back in the same queue, and she simply moved forward as though the space had always been hers. No announcement. No apology. No performance of permission-seeking. She spoke Mandarin first. Clean, formal, the register of someone who had learned it correctly rather than practically. The gate agent responded in that same blurred dialect, and the woman didn't hesitate. She shifted, mid-sentence, into something Won Jun's well-trained ear needed 2 full seconds to identify. Teochew influenced Hokkien. Not guessed, not approximated. Placed, with the accuracy of someone who had spent time inside the language, rather than around it. The gate agent's posture changed. The wall came down. The typing started. Won-jun stood absolutely still, which for him was extraordinary. Because Won-jun Seo was never still without intention. He watched this woman in her deep plum coat, carry-on bag over one shoulder, the unhurried calm of someone who was never going to raise her voice because she understood that volume was the tool of people who had run out of precision. He watched her resolve in 3 minutes a situation that had been defeating him for 11. She turned when it was done. Dark eyes. Unimpressed by him in the specific way that people who are actually impressive are unimpressed by other people's importance. Your rebooking is confirmed. Gate 34, boards. In 20 minutes. A glance at the boarding pass still in his hand. You'll want to move. She did not wait for a thank you. He did not give one. Shock had made him slow, and she was already 3 steps gone, already unhooking her phone. Already on to the next thing, already somewhere else entirely. Won-jun stood at that gate counter for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds of standing still without a purpose, which was, for him, the closest thing to awe his body knew how to produce. Who is that? He didn't find out. Not until 5 months later when he lifted a veil at an altar in Seoul and found her looking back at him, composed, unreadable, the expression of a woman who had recognized him immediately and had absolutely no intention of mentioning it first. Neither had he. Joy Adeze Okafor Seo had moved into the East Wing on the 3rd day of their marriage. She had not asked permission. She had surveyed the house with the practical efficiency of a woman assessing a field position, identified the wing with the best natural light and the least foot traffic, and relocated her considerable working library there before Won-jun had finished his morning briefing with his assistant. He had noted it, filed it, said nothing. This was the arrangement. This was what they had, in their own wordless way, agreed to. She would occupy her space. He would occupy his. They would appear together at the events that required appearing together, perform the visual language of a functional marriage for the audiences that needed to believe in it, and otherwise maintain the clean professional separation of 2 people who had entered a contract with their eyes open. It was, Won-jun had told himself, ideal. No demands, no complications. No one close enough to disrupt the systems he'd spent 3 years rebuilding after his brother's catastrophic unraveling. The perimeter was intact. The exposure was minimal. 42 days. He had been telling himself this was working for 42 days. The laugh had been working for... how long? How many weeks had she been having that conversation in his house? With that voice? With that particular unguarded frequency? While he walked past the East Wing doors on his way to his office and told himself the clean perimeter was necessary? He pulled out his phone, dialed his head of corporate security. I need a communications trace, he said. Complete contact log for the East Wing landline and the number registered to my wife's primary device. Prior 30 days. A pause. No, don't involve the internal team. Use the external firm. Another pause. I am not explaining the reason. Initiate it. He set the phone down, looked at the ruined document. This is strategic intelligence, he told himself. This is due diligence. This is not jealousy. He did not believe himself entirely, but he was a patient man. He could wait for the data. She made one critical error that first day. She forgot that the man in the West Wing remembered everything. He hadn't planned to bring her. The dinner was internal. Division heads, senior directors, the annual performance of collective confidence that kept the board feeling unified. Spouses appeared sometimes. Peripheral. Decorative. They made pleasant conversation, laughed at the appropriate moments, and left early enough to seem unbothered. Won-jun had mentioned it to Joy's assistant with the expectation of a polite decline. She arrived in forest green. Silk blouse, moving when she moved, the kind of fabric that doesn't perform. It simply exists at a different register than everything around it. Wide-leg trousers, gold at her throat and ears. Her locks arranged with the effortless precision of a woman who understood that deliberate and effortless were not opposites. She found her seat with the ease of someone who had been in 100 rooms exactly like this one and had never once found them intimidating. Wonjun watched her settle, felt something in his chest that his diagnostic systems were not equipped to name. Director Kwon moved by the second course. Kwon ran acquisitions. He had the instincts of a man who tested every room for weaknesses before he fully entered it, and he had identified Joy within 30 seconds of her arrival as a variable he could neutralize publicly, cheaply, and without consequence. He was wrong on all 3 counts. Mrs. Seo. Kwon's smile was the smile of a man who had practiced it until it looked natural. You must find all of this corporate talk a bit dense. Wonjun tells us so little about you. The smile stretched. What is it you do with your days? Wonjun's hand found the stem of his wineglass under the table. He held it. Did not drink. Joy looked at Kwon with the unhurried patience of a surgeon who has just been asked by a medical student to explain what a scalpel is. Due diligence, mostly, she said. Kwon's smile stayed in place. The confidence behind it wobbled slightly. I'm sorry? I've been reviewing the cross-border IP provisions in the Meridian Pacific Framework, she said pleasantly. And pleasantly was the precise word, because she was not aggressive, not sharp, not performing. She was simply accurate, the way a scalpel is accurate. Specifically, the clauses your division drafted in Q3. I'm fairly certain they'll create a regulatory conflict under the revised EU-Korea FTA protocols. She reached for her water glass. The language in Section 14.3 is going to be a problem the moment that deal reaches Brussels. The table went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a conversation that had paused. The specific, quality quiet of a room that had just recalibrated. Kwon's smile was still physically present on his face, but the intelligence behind it had shifted. Wonjun released the wine stem. A younger executive at the far end of the table, doing the social math a beat too slowly and a decibel too loudly, said, She's a translator? Cultural and legal linguistics, Joy said, without emphasis. Contract language, negotiation positioning, communication strategy across jurisdictions. A brief pause. It's translation, yes, in the same way that surgery is cutting. A laugh broke loose from somewhere at the table. Genuine. Startled out of the room. Wonjun did not laugh. But something in the vault behind his sternum moved. Small. Involuntary. Like a door that has been shut for a long time and has just felt, for the first time, the pressure of a hand on the other side. He found himself thinking of the airport. He found himself, later that night, opening the Meridian Pacific Framework on his laptop at midnight. Reading Section 14.3, cross-referencing it against the EU-Korea FTA revision that had passed in September. He sat with the results for a long time. She was correct, completely, comprehensively, in a way that his own acquisitions team had missed entirely. Here's what she didn't know about Korean corporate hierarchies. Being right about something the room got wrong doesn't earn you allies. It earns you a target. He told himself he was getting water. This was not the first night he had told himself this. Joy was at the kitchen island in a silk sleep set the color of deep amber, mug in both hands, tablet open in front of her, reading with the focused concentration of someone for whom 2 a.m. was simply a time zone she preferred. She looked up when he came in and did not startle, because Joy Okafor Seo was not a woman who startled. She simply adjusted, the way water adjusts, taking the new shape without losing the substance. The 14.3 provision, Wonjun said. It was not a greeting. Something moved through her eyes, brief, unguarded, before composure recovered it. What about it? You were right. He moved to the cabinet. Glass, water, turned back. I had our legal team review it overnight. We're revising the clause before the Brussels filing. Good. Good. Not I told you. Not any version of it took you a night to confirm what I said in 30 seconds. Just good. Clean. No performance attached to it. He should have said thank you and left. He said nothing and did not move. Joy watched him for a moment with the patience of a woman who had learned that silence, in this house, was often the loudest communication available. Then she said, "There's more tea, ginger and lemongrass. I made too much." He should have declined. "Fine," he said. She poured. He stood on the opposite side of the island, and the silence between them did something he hadn't anticipated. It changed texture. Became less like the silence of two people in parallel and more like the silence of two people in the same current, moving at the same speed, close enough that the water displaced by one reached the other. She reached for a notepad. Mid-thought on something, apparently. Her hand swept across the marble in that particular automatic gesture of a person whose brain moves faster than their spatial awareness. His hand was already there, reaching for the water glass he'd set down. Her fingers landed on the back of his hand. She went still. He did not move his hand. He looked down at the point of contact, her warm brown fingers, the gold of her ring catching the pendant light, the specific gravity of an accidental touch between two people who had not, in 42 days, touched at all. His thumb moved. Slow, one motion, across her knuckles. A question in a language he had not admitted he was learning. She looked up at his face. He said nothing. She said nothing. The silence had changed its character entirely. Become the kind of silence that is not empty, but full. The kind that requires both people to maintain it, because breaking it would change what it was holding. They stood there, in the dim kitchen warmth, for longer than either of them had a name for. She thought she had him figured out. She was so wrong it almost changed everything she'd planned. The file arrived at 9:47 a.m. by encrypted transfer. Won Jun opened it with the same composure he brought to every document, a habit of stillness, a practiced neutrality of expression maintained even when alone, because he had found over years that the habits of control only work when they aren't conditional. He read the first page, read it again. His coffee cooled, untouched, as he moved to the second page, then the third. The man on the phone. The French voice, the warm cadence, the particular register that had produced that laugh through 3 inches of soundproofed mahogany, was not a personal contact, was not a family friend, was not any of the categories Won Jun had, in the undignified interior of the past 48 hours, permitted himself to consider. His name was Edouard Marchais, 46 years old, 3 Forbes profiles, founding CEO of Lumiere Pacific Group, a French technology conglomerate whose North Asian acquisition portfolio was currently valued at. Won Jun stopped. Read the number. Set the file down on the desk with the careful movement of a man handling something that might detonate. Lumiere Pacific. His board had been trying to open dialogue with Lumiere Pacific for 8 months. Quietly. Unsuccessfully. The acquisition, if secured, would reposition CO Holdings as a dominant transcontinental tech entity overnight, would silence every lingering investor anxiety about the Sung Jun collapse, would close the chapter that Won Jun had spent 3 years trying to close. The deal, they had been told, repeatedly and from multiple angles, was essentially inaccessible. Because Lumiere Pacific's CEO had a documented wariness of Korean conglomerates. Because every approach CO Holdings had made had been received with polite, immovable silence. Joy had been laughing on the phone with him, in French. Won Jun stood up from his desk, then sat down, stood up again. The data point, the anomaly. The variable he had been tracking for 48 hours had just rearranged itself into a picture so entirely different from the one he'd been assembling that he needed to physically move to process the recalibration. She wasn't conducting private business in his home. She was conducting that business in his home, for weeks, while he walked past her door manufacturing excuses to be in the same corridor. His wife was not hiding a lover. His wife was the lead negotiator for the opposing side of the most important deal of his career. He was not the suspicious husband, he was the opposing party. And he had been completely, comprehensively, architecturally unaware. Won-jun had been planning to confront her calmly. He'd had the sentences arranged, measured, professionally neutral. The composure of a man who had processed a significant intelligence failure and was now re-entering the situation with full information and appropriate control. He was on the third sentence revision when his front door opened. His door, his house, his gate code, his security system, his marble foyer. Edouard Marché walked through it. He was exactly what 3 Forbes profiles looked like in person. Tall, silver-haired, wearing his suit with the ease of a man for whom clothes have long since stopped being a statement and become simply a consequence of existing at a certain altitude. He moved through the foyer with the natural authority of a man who was comfortable in every room because he was consistently the most significant presence in it. His eyes found joy. His face opened. He kissed her on both cheeks with the warm familiarity of 2 people who had shared enough high-stakes rooms to trust each other's timing completely. Joy smiled, that laugh-adjacent smile, the real one, the one that lived below the professional register and surfaced only when she was genuinely at ease. She let him. She looked, standing beside him in that foyer, like a woman in her right place. Won-jun stood in the hallway shadow. He was aware that he was standing in the shadow of his own home. He noted this, filed it. Edouard pulled back, looked at Joy with the satisfied expression of a chess player who has been watching a board develop through 30 careful moves, and said, loudly, clearly, in carrying English, that made it entirely probable he knew exactly who was standing 11 feet behind him. Are you ready to crush him in the negotiations tomorrow? The foyer went silent. Joy's eyes moved past Edouard's shoulder, found Won-jun's face in the shadow. And she did not look guilty, did not look panicked, did not produce any version of the expression of a person caught in a deception that has run further than intended. She looked like a woman who had been underestimated for 42 days, standing in front of the man who had underestimated her, at the precise moment he finally understood what he had been looking at. Won-jun's voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. In a room that silent, it carried perfectly. How long? Joy held his gaze. She did not flinch, straightened. The specific, unhurried straightening of a woman who has been waiting for a question and has the answer fully prepared. Long enough. The press had been the board's idea. With the Lumiere Pacific talks, finally, in motion, after 8 months of closed doors, the PR team had identified the vulnerability. Any public perception of personal instability in Won-jun's life could trigger exactly the kind of investor anxiety that had taken 3 years to quiet after Sung-jun. The solution arrived at 7 a.m. via his communications director, delivered in the tone of a person carefully narrating a disarmament procedure. For negotiation week, Mr. and Mrs. Seo would present as a unified front, joint appearances, shared spaces, starting with the master suite. Won-jun had agreed without discussion. Joy had agreed with the same quality of silence she applied to most things in this house, complete, and carrying several possible meanings simultaneously. Now she set her overnight bag on the chair nearest the door and surveyed the room with the economy of someone who had assessed more complicated positions than this. I'll take the left side. I don't move when I sleep, and I'm up at 5:30. You won't notice I'm here. I'm aware of your schedule, Won-jun said. She turned to look at him fully. Are you? Not quite a question, more like a probe. The linguistic equivalent of pressing a fingertip to a surface to assess what's underneath. He turned from the window. In the morning light, real light, unfiltered, the automated glass not engaged because he hadn't thought to engage it, she was visible to him in a way the dim kitchen had only suggested. The amber warmth of her skin, the straightness of her spine that was not tension, but resolution, the way she occupied space as though the space had always been shaped for her and was simply being recognized for it now. I know you run at 5:45, he said. You prefer Americanos. You read physical books in the East Wing. I've heard the pages from the corridor. You have a call with someone in Lagos every Thursday at 7 that runs long. A pause. I know considerably more about your schedule than I have given you any reason to believe. Something shifted in her face. Not the composure. The composure held. But underneath it, something recalculated. Then you'll know, she said carefully, that I take my calls in private. I wasn't listening to the calls. A beat. Quiet. I was listening for you. The room was very still. Joy looked at him with the expression of a woman who had written a version of this man and was now encountering a chapter that hadn't been in the draft. She picked up her bag, moved it to the left side of the room, began unpacking with the focused economy of someone who had decided to hold this conversation until she had more data to work with. Won Jun watched her for 3 seconds longer than neutrality required. Then he dressed for the negotiations. He had been in hundreds of negotiations. He had never been across a table from his wife. Joy in the boardroom was a different element than joy in any other room he'd observed her in. At the corporate dinner, she had been surgical, precise, cold when she needed cold, warm when warmth served the point. In the kitchen, she had been something else, something that still didn't have a clean category in his internal taxonomy. But here she was elemental, the way weather is elemental. Not performing force, simply being it. She spoke, and the room's center of gravity relocated. She listened, really listened, with her full attention and no visible agenda. And you could watch the other side of the table feel genuinely heard, and then, 3 exchanges later, observe in slow, helpless motion as she used exactly what they'd told her to restructure the entire basis of what was being negotiated. She caught him watching her mid-session. Dense technical terrain, territorial licensing rights across 3 jurisdictions. She was midpoint, clear and unhurried. She looked up and across the table and found his eyes already on her. She did not look away. She held the look for exactly as long as it took to make it deliberate. 2 seconds. 3. A statement in a language that had no official vocabulary in a negotiating room. Then she returned to her notes, and the session continued, and Won Jun spent the remainder of the morning managing the particular difficulty of trying to negotiate against someone he was simultaneously, involuntarily, studying like a text he desperately needed to understand. At the lunch break, Edward materialized beside him at the coffee station. "She is extraordinary," Edward said, without preamble, pouring his coffee without looking at Won Jun. 4 years I have worked with her. I have never found anyone better at identifying the distance between what a party says they want and what they cannot actually afford to lose. He paused. "You understand the distinction?" Won Jun said nothing. "She told me nothing about you," Edward continued. "Pleasant. Precise. 4 years. She mentions her husband perhaps twice. Both times. Professional context only." He looked at Won Jun directly. "I found this interesting. Joy is someone who talks extensively about the things that matter to her." A brief pause, just long enough to land. "The things she does not talk about are the ones that are complicated." He picked up his coffee and walked away with the ease of a man who had said exactly what he intended to say and required no response to confirm it. Won Jun stood at the coffee station, looked across the room to where Joy stood at the window, reviewing her tablet in the afternoon light, the terracotta of her blouse catching it the way the amber of her sleep set had caught the kitchen pendant at 2 a.m. Won Jun came in at 11:30 expecting absence. He found her at the desk, and he knew, from across the room, before he had taken a second step, that something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not the kind of wrong that announces itself, the quiet kind, the kind that a person with Joy's particular discipline keeps compressed under perfect surface pressure. And that is only visible if you know how to read the quality of someone's breathing. Her breath was measured, controlled, the deliberate pattern of someone using technique to hold something in. He walked to her without announcing it. She didn't look up. He stood behind her and looked at the screen. 3 open documents, a spreadsheet of sequential figures, a draft clause with 11 tracked revision iterations in the margin. He read the clause. Read it again. The territorial provision, he said quietly. They won't accept the current framework. Her voice was steady. Steady in the way that things are steady when they are being held steady. If we don't resolve this before Thursday, the entire deal slides to Q2. She paused. Which means your firm's launch timeline collapses. He had read enough of the deal's architecture over the past 24 hours to understand the sequence. The Lumiere Pacific close funded the capital chain that funded her independent firm. If the deal slipped, the chain broke. This wasn't just his empire at stake. This was her exit. Her independence. The thing she had been building toward, invisibly, from inside a wing of his house that he hadn't entered in 42 days. She went still. You read the full terms. I read everything relevant to my position. A pause. Quieter. And yours? Joy turned in her chair and looked up at him, and for the first time across all the days he had observed her. From corridors, across dinner tables, through the shadow of his own foyer, her composure had a fracture in it. One, at the edges only. The specific costly exhaustion of a woman who had been carrying something enormous alone because she had not, for 42 days, had any reason to believe there was anyone in this house capable of helping her carry it. Wonjun did not make a speech. He placed his hands on her shoulders and began, carefully, with the unhurried attention of someone learning a language through touch, to work at the knots there. She went rigid for one moment, the automatic resistance of a self-sufficient person being offered help they don't know the protocol for. Then, by degrees, she didn't. I don't care about the acquisition, he said, low, rough in a way his boardroom voice never permitted itself to be. I want you to understand that, whatever happens Thursday, the deal, the timeline, the whole architecture of it, I don't care about it the way I care about... He stopped. Joy was very still beneath his hands. The way I care about the fact, he said, finding the words the way you find your footing on unfamiliar ground, carefully, placing each one before trusting weight to it, that you were laughing in this house for 6 weeks, and I was the only person in it who wasn't in the room. A long silence held by both of them. Wonjun. I know, he said. I know what I've been. She reached up and covered one of his hands with hers. Not the accidental overlap from the kitchen. This was deliberate. Full. The anchoring grip of someone who has decided to stop pretending the current isn't there. Tell me what you see in the territorial clause, she said. Show me your angle. He pulled up a chair. They worked until 3 a.m, and somewhere in the second hour Joy leaned back and said, that's it. That's the language. And Wonjun had his elbow on the desk and his shoulder against hers, and neither of them had moved from that contact for the better part of 2 hours, and neither of them had suggested they should. The alert arrived at 7:02 a.m. Wonjun was already awake, had been since 4:30, turning the territorial clause language in his mind, watching the darkness outside his window give way to the gray preliminary of a soul morning. The notification was from his secure communications monitor. A flag on 3 outbound press submissions from a SEO Holdings network device, sent to financial journalists at 3 major outlets, time-stamped 6:47 a.m. He opened the draft. Read the headline. Questions emerge over SEO Holdings. Merger strategy as CEO's wife faces conflict of interest inquiry. He read the body. It was, he acknowledged, in the cold, clear part of his mind that assessed things before his response to them, genuinely well constructed. Nothing explicitly false. Every individual sentence technically defensible. Real facts. Joy's role as Lumiere Pacific's lead negotiator, her residence in the SEO household, the professional overlap, arranged in a sequence designed to produce a single, devastating implication. That Joy Okafor Seo had used her position as Won Jun's wife to access CO Holdings' acquisition vulnerabilities. That the marriage itself was an high-intelligence operation. It was the kind of story that, once published, doesn't need to be true to do its damage. The insinuation was the mechanism. The clarification always comes too late. His security team traced the device by 7:14 a.m. By 7:31 a.m., Won Jun had a name. Park Soo-hyun had been positioned for the acquisitions director role for 18 months. With the Lumiere Pacific deal representing the largest single acquisition in SEO Holdings history, its closure, or its spectacular collapse, would define the company's next leadership era. A scandal around Won Jun's judgment in the final days of negotiation would demand accountability. In the resulting reorganization, a director who had maintained clear distance from the controversy, who had the institutional knowledge and the board relationships, would find the path upward significantly cleared. Won Jun sat with this information for 9 minutes. He counted them. Then he made 3 calls. She thought the danger was behind her. It was already inside the building. "I want to be precise," Won Jun said, "because I value precision." The room stilled in the specific way rooms still when they understand that the normal rules governing this space have, for the duration of what follows, been suspended. Someone in this building submitted a fabricated conflict of interest story to 3 financial press outlets this morning. The piece was designed to damage my wife's professional reputation and to destabilize a 9-figure acquisition at its most critical juncture. His eyes moved to Park Soo-hyun with the same quality of attention he gave to balance sheets he knew were lying. The submission came from a company device. This suggests either a profound arrogance about our security infrastructure or a fundamental misunderstanding of it. Either represents a competence failure on top of an ethical one. Park Soo-hyun did not speak. "Your resignation, effective immediately, will be on my desk before noon. NDA review. By external counsel. Severance per the terms of your contract and nothing additional." Park's mouth opened. "I'm not finished." The room became absolutely still. Won Jun reached into the leather portfolio and produced a document. Clean, precise, bearing the seal of his personal legal team, who had begun preparing it at 7:32 a.m., 3 minutes after he had the name. "Effective this morning, I am transferring 15% of my personal SEO holdings into my wife's name." He slid the document toward the company's secretary. "These are voting shares, not preferred. Controlling interest in 2 primary subsidiaries. Joy Okaforcio's signature will be required on any major structural decision in those divisions going forward." The room took this in. Won Jun let it. "I am doing this," he continued, "because people in this company have made the error of treating my marriage as a vulnerability to be exploited. I want to correct that misunderstanding with the kind of clarity that does not require a follow-up conversation." He paused. "My wife is not a liability. She is the most strategically capable person I have personally encountered in 15 years of business. The fact that it took me this long to say that out loud is a failure of mine, not hers. And I intend to spend a significant amount of time making it right." He closed the portfolio. Questions? Nobody had questions. Park Soo-hyun cleared his desk before noon. The 3 press items were killed by every outlet within the hour. The story, stripped of its intended scandal, had no structural weight to stand on. Won Jun's communications director, who had been in the room for all of it, sent a single message to the PR team that read, "Forget the unified front strategy. We're not managing this. This story is fine." At 4 p.m., Joy's phone buzzed once, a message from Won Jun. "The shares transfer is complete. No conditions, no strings attached, yours." She read it twice, put the phone face down, picked up her pen, and closed the Lumiere Pacific deal in 47 minutes. Joy stopped in the doorway. Won Jun was at the far end of the room, at the new glass wall, with his back to her. It was not avoidance. The posture was entirely wrong for avoidance. It was the stance of a man who had done something he was not certain would be received correctly, and was giving her the first moments of it without his presence complicating them. She walked into the room slowly. Her fingers trailed the desk edge. Wide, solid. Exactly the span she would have specified if anyone had ever asked her what she needed. The shelves, built to dimensions that accommodated the oversized international reference volumes she had been keeping in floor stacks for 8 years because the shelving in every other office she'd worked in was too shallow. She noticed this, filed it, felt it land somewhere specific inside her chest, the brass plate beside the door. She stood in the center of the room and let the afternoon light from the new glass wall fall across her. Wonjun. He turned. The afternoon light came through the glass and fell across him, and he looked different than any version she had catalogued across all the rooms they'd occupied together. No jacket, shirt collar open, 2 buttons, sleeves pushed to his elbows in the way of someone who had been working with his hands and simply forgotten to reassemble himself before she arrived. He looked like the version of himself that existed at the Singapore Airlines gate counter before she'd known who he was, before the weight of everything he'd decided to become had fully settled back into his posture. He looked like someone who had chosen, deliberately and at some cost, to put something down. She crossed the room. He watched her come without moving, and his expression was not the micro-calibrated neutrality she had studied across 42 days of careful parallel distance. It was open, the specific, undefended openness of a person who has stopped protecting the wrong things and is standing in the open space that decision creates, unsure yet of what fills it. He lowered himself, not to the floor, to one knee, in the afternoon light of the room he had built for her, surrounded by the details she would have specified and hadn't needed to. "I'm not proposing," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely direct. "We're already married. That contract exists, and I'm not asking to renegotiate its terms." A breath. "I'm asking for a different one." Joy looked down at him. Her expression moved through several things at once, and she let it. Didn't manage it. Didn't compress it into professionalism. "A real partnership," he said. "Your firm, my resources, separate and equal. Every consequential decision, together. No separate wings. No 42 days of silence I convinced myself was discipline." He exhaled, and in the exhale was 3 years of compressed stillness finding its release. "I want to be in the room, Joy. Whatever room you're in. Professional, personal, every room after this one. I want to be the person you don't need to explain yourself to. I want to earn the way you were laughing on that phone." Silence. "That's what you want," she said. "To earn my laugh." "I want to earn everything," he said, "starting from nothing. Whatever that requires." Joy looked at him. The long, unhurried assessment of a woman who does not finalize a position until she has examined every angle, who has built a career on the understanding that what a party says they want and what they cannot afford to lose are rarely the same thing. She reached down and took his face in her hands, warm palms, the gold of her rings against the line of his jaw. She tilted his face up toward hers. "Stand up," she said softly. He stood, and she kissed him. Not carefully. Not the managed precision of 2 people performing a reconciliation for an audience. She kissed him the way she'd laughed on that phone, fully, without rehearsal, the kind of thing that originates somewhere low and unguarded and arrives before the decision to allow it is fully made. His hands found her waist and pulled her in with the concentrated intensity of a man who had been in 42 days of self-constructed exile from exactly this, and the afternoon light came through the new glass wall and fell across both of them, and the room itself seemed to participate. Warm and bright and open in a way that the rest of this house had never been permitted to be. When they finally separated, Joy kept her hands against his face, and Wonjun kept his arms around her, and neither of them introduced any distance. "For the record," Joy said, her voice lower and warmer than any register he had heard from her. Lower than the boardroom, warmer than the kitchen, entirely outside the professional vocabulary. "You were never actually replaceable." Jun closed his eyes for one moment. I know that now, he said. The French was a decoy. She pulled back just far enough to look at him properly. The real negotiation was always in Korean. Edward's team knew your security would prioritize monitoring his communications. So they did. A pause. Something moved through her expression. The fully realized version of that laugh, distilled into a look. You were never the target, Wonjun. You were always the opportunity. He stared at her. The Lumiere Pacific deal was designed from the beginning to require a CO Holdings co-lead, she said. Not an acquisition, a partnership. I just needed to know whether you were actually worth building it with. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything it was recontextualizing. The airport, he said finally, was real, she said. I helped a stranger because he needed help. Then I found out who the stranger was. A small, private smile. The real one, below the professional register. The one that had been living in the East Wing for 42 days while he stood in the corridor manufacturing reasons to be nearby. Then I took the meeting with the matchmaker. Wonjun exhaled. It was not quite a laugh. It was what lives on the other side of a laugh for someone who has kept that door closed for 3 years. Quiet. Fractured. The sound of a compression releasing. You are extraordinary, he said. I know, she said simply. He pulled her back in. Outside the new glass wall, the garden held the last of the afternoon light. The brass plate caught it and held it warm. Somewhere in the house, the oak doors of the east wing stood open, both of them fully for the first time, and the distance between the wings, measured in 42 days of chosen silence, had become exactly the length of the story it had taken to cross it. She never needed saving. She needed a partner who was finally worth the deal. And the man who had built his entire empire on the principle that closeness costs had just discovered what it actually cost to stay closed. If this story hit different, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, at what moment did Wonjun actually fall? Because I think it was earlier than he'd ever admit.